Do we need a new world? Badiou's ambiguity with regard to this crucial point hinges on his triad, being, world, event, which functions in the same way as Kierkegaard's triad of the aesthetic, ethical, religious. The choice is always between two terms, an either-or, that is, the three terms do not operate at the same ontological level. It is the same with Lacan's imaginary, I, symbolic, S, real, R, or with Freud's ego, superego, id. When we focus on one term, the other two get condensed into one, under the hegemony of one of them. If we focus on the imaginary, the real and the symbolic get contracted into the imaginary's opposite, under the domination of the symbolic. If we focus on R, I and S are contracted under the domination of S. Therein resides the shift in Lacan's work announced by his Seminar 7 on the ethics of psychoanalysis. The shift from the axis IS to the axis SR. Or in Freud's case, if we focus on the ego, its opposite is the id, which encompasses the superego, and so on and so forth. Logique des mondes enacts the shift from the axis being-event to the axis world-event. What this means is that being, world, and event do not form a triad. We have either the opposition of being and world, appearance, or the opposition of world and event. There is an unexpected conclusion to be drawn from this, insofar as, Badiou emphasizes the point again and again, a true event is not merely a negative gesture, but opens up a positive dimension of the new. An event is the imposition of a new world, of a new master signifier, a new naming, as Badiou puts it, or what Lacan called vers un nouveau signifiant. The true evental change is the passage from the old to the new world. One should even go a step further and introduce the dimension of dialectics here. An event can be accounted for by the tension between the multiplicity of being and the world. Its site is the symptomal torsion of a world. It is generated by the excess of being over world, of presence over representation. The properly Hegelian enigma is here not how is an event, the rise of something truly new, possible, but rather how do we pass from being to world, to finite appearance? That is, how can being, its flat infinite multiplicity, appear to itself? Is it not that this presupposes a kind of negativity that has to be somehow operative in the midst of being itself, some force of, not infinity, but on the contrary, finitization, what Hegel called the absolute power of tearing apart what in reality belongs together, of giving autonomy to appearance? Prior to any synthesis, spirit is what Kant called transcendental imagination, the power to abstract, to simplify, mortify, to reduce a thing to its unairy feature, the train unair, der einzige Zug, to erase its empirical richness. Spirit is the power to say, when it is confronted with a confusing wealth of empirical features, all this doesn't really matter, just tell me if the feature X is there or not. And insofar as world as such is sustained by a point, by such a violent imposition of a unairy feature, is a pointless atonal world, not a name for worldlessness. Badiou himself recently claimed that our time is devoid of worldliness, referring to Marx's well-known passage from the Communist Manifesto about the deterritorializing force of capitalism, which dissolves all fixed social forms. The passage where Marx speaks of the desacralization of all sacred bonds in the icy waters of capitalism has an enthusiastic tone. It is Marx's enthusiasm for the dissolving power of capital, the fact that capital revealed itself to be the material power capable of disencumbering us of the superego features of the one and the sacred bonds that accompany it, effectively represents its positively progressive character, and it is something that continues to unfold to the present day. Having said that, the generalized atomism, the recurrent individualism, and finally the abasement of thought into mere practices of administration, of the government of things or of technical manipulation, could never satisfy me as a philosopher. I simply think that it is in the very element of desacralization that we must reconnect to the vocation of thinking. Badiou thus recognizes the exceptional ontological status of capitalism, whose dynamic undermines every stable framework of representation. The task that should normally be performed by critico-political activity, namely the task of undermining the representational frame of the state, is already performed by capitalism itself, and this poses a problem for Badiou's notion of evental politics. In pre-capitalist formations, every state, every representational totalization implies a foundational exclusion, a point of symptomal torsion, a part of no part, an element which, although part of the system, does not have a proper place within it, and emancipatory politics has to intervene from this excessive supernumerary element which, although part of the situation, cannot be accounted for in terms of the situation. However, what happens when the system no longer excludes the excess, but directly posits it as its driving force, as is the case in capitalism, which can only reproduce itself through its constant self-revolutionizing, through the constant overcoming of its own limits? To put it in a simplified way, if a political event, a revolutionary, emancipatory intervention into a determinate historical world, is always linked to the excessive point of its symptomal torsion, if it by definition undermines the contours of this world, how then are we to define the emancipatory political intervention into a universe which is already in itself worldless, which, for its reproduction, no longer needs to be contained by the constraints of a world? As Alberto Toscano noted in his perspicuous analysis, Badiou gets caught here in an inconsistency. He draws the logical conclusion that in a worldless universe, which is the contemporary universe of global capitalism, the aim of emancipatory politics should be the precise opposite of its traditional modus operandi. The task today is to form a new world, to propose new master signifiers that would provide cognitive mapping. Whilst in Badiou's theoretical writings on the appearance of worlds, he cogently argues that events engender the dysfunction of worlds and their transcendental regimes. In his Ontology of the Present, Badiou advocates the necessity, in our intervallic or worldless times, of constructing a world, such that those now excluded can come to invent new names, names capable of sustaining new truth procedures. As he writes, "I hold that we are at a very special moment, a moment at which there is not any world. As a result, philosophy has no other legitimate aim except to help find the new names that will bring into existence the unknown world that is only waiting for us because we are waiting for it." In a peculiar inversion of some of the key traits of his doctrine, it seems that Badiou is here advocating, to some extent, an ordering task, one that will, inevitably, if perhaps mistakenly, resonate for some with the now ubiquitous slogan, "Another world is possible." This inconsistency brings us back to the topic of determinate negation. The ordering task of building a new world is a kind of return of the repressed, not only the repressed of Badiou's theory, but also the repressed of the political event itself, which serves Badiou as the main contemporary point of reference, and which, as we have seen, failed precisely in this task of ordering the Maoist cultural revolution.